Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. God has shaped and crafted each of us uniquely with our own personality, thoughts, dreams, temperament, feelings, talents, gifts, and desires. Parker Palmer calls this the true seeds of self, which God has planted inside each of us as He invites us to listen to Him and live faithfully out of our true selves in Christ. When we don't live in alignment with what we truly believe, think, or feel, or when we ignore our values, we violate our integrity. Something inside of us dies when we stay silent about our values and preferences. God's invitation is an ongoing process of grounding our identity in His love and learning to respectfully assert ourselves. In today's episode, my clinical supervisor, Carley, and I explore a practice called climbing the ladder of integrity, a way of clarifying our values and living more fully into the person God has made us to be. Listen in. Well, Carley, today we're diving into our sixth relational skill for emotionally healthy relationships, which is climbing the ladder of integrity. And I know this is your favorite skill, I think, that we've covered so far.
It really is. I'm really excited to talk more about it today with you. Yeah.
So to dive right in, what does it mean to climb the ladder of integrity? And what about this skill has connected with you so deeply?
Oh, in so many ways. So one of the primary concepts that they discuss in this particular chapter is that we are all created uniquely with our own thoughts, feelings, values. And so this is kind of the idea when we're thinking back to like a scriptural view of the self, the imago Dei, right? That we are unique and yet called into unity and connection with others and this reciprocity of relationship. But that uniqueness is God given. It's the image of the Trinity, right? And so these seeds, as they say, the true seeds of the self that live inside us invite us to kind of listen, to get clear about who we are, who God has created us uniquely to be. And that's okay, right? I think the challenge in our Christian culture and maybe in the large demographic of society is that there's lots of places where we can feel like I have to be this way in order to be accepted, etc. And so what I think this particular skill does is it allows us to get quiet enough to really check in with what are my values? What is important to me? Because integrity is, right, showing up the same way in different places, or this idea of who I am on the inside is the same as what I'm saying on the outside or how I'm living on the outside. And that congruence with our values is so important for living both an aligned life in general, right? For just emotional health, but also relationally. If we're saying one thing to our friends, but feeling another, that incongruence really impacts us. It impacts our relationships. It impacts our even relationship with God. And so this particular skill really helps us get clear about what's happening on the inside and how is that playing out on the outside. And we can violate our integrity, right? That congruence when we're not living in alignment with what we believe, think, and feel, or when we really ignore the values that we hold dear. So this plays out in relationship in so many ways. And I'll use myself as the example, right? If I value trust and honesty, and yet I'm perpetually put in a dynamic relationally where I don't feel like I can be honest, or I don't really feel like I can trust the other person, then in that sense, right, I'm violating my own value, right, my own integrity. If I say I'm someone who values those things, but I'm not communicating, hey, this doesn't feel like a trusting dynamic, or I haven't been honest with you, right? That's mine to own. And that's kind of what this skill helps us do, is set the stage for really getting curious about what's happening inside of me, and then how I can communicate that to another person, myself and God.
Yeah, that's so good. Tell me if you'd rather come back to this later.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about myself and maybe some of our listeners who might be hearing you talk and wondering, what actually are my values?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about value formation?
Sure. Yeah. So this is something I do when I teach this curriculum at my church. One of the things that I do is I'll print out a values exploration. This is just literally a piece of paper with a ton of values on it. And it allows people to just look at, like, there's so many things that we can value as people. And I normally encourage people to take time to just circle about 10 to 20 of those. And then from those, we kind of try to get smaller. I like to call them bright lines. What we tend to see as values tend to be collections sometimes of different uh, kind of lines of values. And so that's something that if we've never done before, it can be really, really insightful to be able to say, what is it that I actually care about? And to do that, it really just takes time to sit down and ask those questions, to look at some values on a list and say, what's important to me? That's how I've done it. That's how I teach clients to do it. And sometimes it can also be helpful if people are like, I've never done that before, to say, like, let's look at the last week of your life, the last 7 days of your life. What are some themes? What are some patterns of things that were important to you? And you could probably synthesize some values from that feel really life-giving. And it's like, what could you not live without? It's like, if I don't go to the gym in the morning, I might be a cranky individual, right? Like, so that's a value of mine, like being able to move my body, or maybe it's, having time with friends and valuing connection and intimacy and emotionally. So whatever it is for you, being able to kind of be curious about that, starting there can be really helpful. And this tool kind of builds off of that, I think, kind of in addition to what we've already talked about in previous episodes about, like, checking in with just how we're feeling. This is kind of a growth of that, of like, okay, now I'm taking what I'm feeling as maybe the data point for my value alignment or my value disalignment, and then using this tool to kind of get clear about what is it that I need in this situation in order to get back on track, in order to be more aligned with my values, so that I can feel clear internally about what's important to me in this relationship, in this situation, etc.
Yeah, that's so good. One of the things that Pete Scazzero talks about in this chapter is that Jesus lived with such integrity and alignment with his values.
Yeah.
And he described Jesus as, and I had to read this part a couple times because I was like, wait, what? But he described Jesus as neither selfless nor selfish, but as someone deeply grounded in a sense of their own worth and calling. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think he meant by that? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. And for those that also feel like they have a people pleasing, part or bend, as I have been working with for a really long time, is that the kindness and the deference, right, of wanting to be, kind or selfless, quote unquote, is very ingrained in our Christian culture. And yet, when we look at the life of Jesus, he perpetually disappointed people. And so I think that that's where this reorientation of what does selfishness mean, what does selfless mean, can really emerge, right? When we're thinking, okay, if disappointing people doesn't mean I'm selfish, right? Then what could that mean for me? Like, that's kind of freeing. Or to really believe that it's okay that someone can be disappointed. And that's hard. That's still hard for some parts of me, to be able to say, it's okay if someone's disappointed that I don't share the same value as them. Because I know I've been disappointed when people don't share the same value. I think there's something to be said about finding people that are in value alignment with us. Like, yes, those are my people. But to offer grace and curiosity to where other people have maybe found different values. I think that speaks a lot to what psychology would use as differentiation of self, right? This idea that Jesus beautifully models through the Gospels for us. And I think even within the Trinity, we see such a beautiful example of how we can be separate but together. Like, the call in Christianity is unity and love, right? but that doesn't negate our differences. It actually encourages, right, uniqueness within that unity to be able to bless those differences. And so I think that's what this kind of concept really helps us, like being able to be clear about what I value, and then also be curious about what someone else values, and not believe that those things that they're threatening to one another, but they actually can be like positive, like, oh, I want to learn from you and you can learn from me, right? That's such a maturation, right, of the self. And so the to answer the question, right, the idea here that Jesus is putting out is that he didn't live as if nobody else counted, right? But he also didn't live not acknowledging what his call was from the Lord, right? And so I think this takes a lot of, it's a slowing down, it's a discernment process. It's not just like, I know who I am. It's right. The tone and texture of this language isn't like, well, I can do whatever I want because I can disappoint people, right? And that's not selfish. I think there's a really gentle pace to this. At least it has, as I've been growing in it in my life, of being curious of, okay, I obviously don't want to hurt people's feelings, and I'm not going to overextend myself just because I feel like it's going to hurt someone else's feelings, right? Like that would be stepping into lack of value, right? For me, when I'm asked to do something now in my own process, now it looks like, okay, I want to honor the invitation to, step into what someone's asking me to do. But then I have to stop and say, let me get back to you on that. Let me check in with my values and see if my time, if my energy, if my schedule in this season can actually do that well, right? Because I think there's something to be said about being able to kind of separate those things. And so differentiation of self allows us to hold on to our separateness and our togetherness at the same time. And that's hard. I will say this, like this growth of differentiation of self, especially if you've come from a mesh patterns of relating, right? If your family of origin or your Christian tradition said this is the way you have to be in order to be accepted and loved and seen as selfless and loving, then it's going to be harder, right? That's kind of my story. And so being able to slowly unblend and like detach in a healthy way, that I first go to God with that invitation and get clear about what he's called me to, just like Jesus did, right? Over and over again. Like God called him to a certain thing and certain people in certain places. And that did mean that people were pretty upset with him, but that he was true to the call of God in his life. So I could go on and on, so you might have to stop me, but these are just thoughts that I have about it. It's really powerful. It's a really powerful thought to be able to hold space for, okay, if Jesus is modeling this, what could it look like for my life?
Yeah, and I think this was the first time that I connected differentiation and living with integrity, and how those two things are so intertwined.
So good.
I'd love to explore that more.
Sure.
So when you think about differentiation, what are some of the characteristics or qualities you notice in someone who is truly differentiated?
Yeah, I'll use the scale that's in the reading just because I think that's really helpful. He uses the Bowen scale of differentiation, and some of the things that are just listed in here. If we're looking at like what does it look like to notice my scale of differentiation, right? If we can distinguish between fact and feeling, right? Being able to follow life goals that are determined from within rather than being maybe drawn by like what other people think you should do. I think another aspect of this could be being confident in one's beliefs, but not dogmatic or closed to other people's thinking, right? The ability to respect others without having to change them, I think, is another really, really important one, right? That the invitation is to curiosity, and that's what kind of allows people to, we're not, I don't know what you need, and being able to hold that space allows just for freedom on our end, but also on the others to be able to make decisions for themselves. Freedom to enjoy life and play, right? Ability to have a non-anxious presence in the midst of stress and pressure. Ability to take responsibility for our own destiny and choices. And just, I think another one that I think is also really important when we're talking about this is the ability to listen to other people's beliefs and thoughts, and then being able to hold on to beliefs that we still believe are true, but then discard and maybe update old beliefs. And that process can be really difficult if we feel pretty connected to old beliefs of the past, and then we're like, wait, do I believe this anymore? And am I free to update those beliefs in my life?
Yeah, and it sounds like there's so much freedom and spaciousness that comes from doing the hard work of
Yeah,
differentiation and really learning to live from your true
that's
self.
right. That's right.
But on the flip side, when someone isn't differentiated, when they're not living in alignment with their values or living with integrity, what are some of the signs or patterns you tend to notice?
Yeah. So it's quite the opposite inversion, right? It's maybe little energy for like self-directedness. Much of life's energy is focused on winning the approval of others. There might be some emotional neediness or like high reactivity to other people that maybe don't agree with us. Uh, in addition, I think there can be dependence in relationships or poor transition in crisis or life adjustments, and then unable to see where they end and another person begins. And I love that language,
Yes, so good.
because it kind of falls into this language of like false responsibility where we are so enmeshed, right? We're so connected where we don't know what's mine and what's yours, right? Where that line begins. And so, if those are some of the feelings that, even as those that are listening, are like, oh, I definitely feel that. This is an invitation of like, yeah, this is normal, to the extent of like where we maybe start, and then learning how to differentiate is a developmental process. And so this is finding out where you fit in the scale is the first step, right? That awareness, okay, this is where I'm at. And the good news is like our development invites us to that differentiation of both separateness and togetherness, this uniqueness, like embracing who you are and who Christ created you to be is such a gift. And also giving that invitation to others is, I think, part of that process.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, and I'm sure as listeners are listening as well, I'm thinking, how do we climb the ladder of integrity? I want to climb.
Yes, let's do it. Okay.
So, can you walk us through what this process looks like?
Yes, I would love to. So, in line with everything that we've been talking about today, the ladder of integrity is really, this is the purpose, and this is stated in the workbook. The purpose is to clarify your values by processing your thoughts and feelings, and if appropriate, um, to assert yourself respectfully. So, one of the things that I love to say with this particular one is I use the rule of three. I will use this skill with myself and God. And then if I still feel like I am not getting enough clarity or I need something more, I'll go to a trusted friend or therapist or a mentor. And then if it still doesn't feel clear, I'll use this in an actual conversation with someone. So that's kind of my preface, my added preface to this. But the ladder of integrity is going to walk us through 12 steps. Now, I will go quickly, but we'll hopefully have some pictures for people to be able to go back to this. And one of the other principles that I think is also really important is that it helps us get honest and clear about what's going on inside of us. It also helps us clarify what our values are so that we can assert ourselves with another person, or even just be like, oh, that's why I'm so frustrated about this, or that's why I'm so anxious about this. It kind of puts like more language to the emotional, maybe sensational bodily experience we're having. And then it also, I think, helps us recognize the imago Dei in us of like, what is God speaking to me in this disalignment, right? Even in disalignment, I believe that God can be showing us what is really true, what we really value. I'm a one on the Enneagram. My justiceness is like strong, right? And so when something happens and I get really angry, I have to be like, okay, where is justice in this? Like, where is the value of justice being shifted? So one of the important things that they'll say about the ladder of integrity, and this is my last thought before we jump in, is that it's not conflict resolution skill, right? This is not to be brought in so that we can fix something. That's not the agenda. The agenda is clarity and internal alignment so that we can have a clear conversation and that builds on another skill. Or if it's just to express something in a situation, but it's not like high level conflict. We're not going to be using that in this. So, okay. In the ladder of integrity, we start from the bottom of the ladder and we work our way up. And so it's kind of sectioned off into different segments. So questions or statements 1 through 6 are going to be our thoughts and feelings. So we're really digging in here. And then from 7 to 10 are our values, really getting clear about what how our emotions connect with those values that we have. And then the last 3, 11, just the last 2, 11 and 12 is our hopes. So one of the things they say in this is try to stick to one issue. So I will use an example in this as I go through it to kind of explain that. So the first question is, right now, the issue on my mind is. So I'll use an example of like a text message, right? So the issue on my mind right now is that you haven't been responding to my text messages. I'm anxious about talking about this because that's the second question, number 2. I'm anxious about talking about this because this is a tricky one. I'll put a little caveat in here. It's really easy to start with because you are going to make me feel better because you, right? So, but we really have to turn it inward. So I'm anxious about talking about this because I feel afraid of making you feel bad, right? So I'm starting with me, but it's more about me causing conflict, right? I'm like, oh, I don't want you to feel bad about not texting me back, but I'm frustrated that you didn't text me back, right? So we're naming that. And then number 3 is a part of me, my part in this is, right? So this is where we're trying to take any ownership. In some situations, maybe we don't have a part, but in most situations we could take, even if it's a little, what is my part in this situation? Well, my part in the situation is that I've been thinking about it for days and I haven't addressed it yet with you, right? I've been creating narratives going back to assumptions, right, in an earlier episode. And so my part in this is I haven't been bringing it to your attention either and getting clarity on it. Number 4, my need in this issue is. And so in an issue with a text message, it would be, my need in this issue is I really want to understand what's going on for you so that I don't make assumptions about maybe if you're mad at me or if you just don't care about my text message, etc. My feelings about this issue are oftentimes for me, it's like I'm stressed or I'm anxious. I feel maybe a little angry and disappointed, especially when it comes to like lack of communication in a relationship. And then number 6 is what my reaction tells me about me is. So we're going to take those feelings and then get curious, like, oh, those feelings are telling me that this really means a lot to me, right? Like I'm really upset and disappointed or anxious because my relationship with this person means a lot, or the resolution of the resolution of this really means a lot to me because I value the relationship. And then number 7 is our hinge point, and it says this issue is important to me because I value blank, and I violate that value when. So if I'm going to plug it in here with this particular topic, it would be the issue is important to me because I value communication. And I violate that value when I don't follow up on why there's miscommunication or lack of communication, right? So again, we're turning it on ourselves because if I'm the one feeling this way, then it's my ownership of it to then move towards this other person or the situation and get clear about what it is. And so if I was processing this out, I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm noticing that my value is communication. And I really need that in order to feel connected in relationship with other people. Number 8, I'm willing or not willing. So you could do both or just one of these depending on the situation, right? So I would say in this particular situation, I would say like, hey, I'm willing to check in like on a weekly basis if texting too frequently is stressful to you, or if you're feeling overwhelmed right now, I could do a different form of communication, like just kind of trying to, right? This kind of goes back to possible solutions. Like, what am I willing to try here to make this work or negotiate it a little bit? And then on the other end, I'm not willing to just not talk about this. I'm not willing to like just pretend like everything's fine when it doesn't feel fine. And then 9, one thing I could do to improve this situation is, one thing I could do in this situation is right? Communicate more effectively or follow up in person. Like if you didn't respond to me over text, maybe I could say something in person so that you don't feel like you have to go back to the text. Something like that. That could be a possible thing that you could invite into that. And then number 10, the most important thing I want you to know is, and so this is where I would go back to what you found out in your values and say, something like, I really want to be able to communicate and feel like, you are valuing my relationship and that you feel valued in interaction with me as well. And so that can be like the highlight point of really how we're going to synthesize all of this into what we really want to communicate in the dynamic. And then 11 and 12 are really helpful endings. 11 says, I think my honest sharing will benefit our relationship by, I think by communicating how I'm really feeling, right? By bringing up what potentially could be a big barrier, right, in relationship with one another. And then 12, I hope and look forward to. And this could be anything. Like I hope and look forward to trying out this new style of communication, or I hope and look forward to doing, having a better communication rhythm that fits both of our styles of communicating, right? So that's like that's how I would process through it. I'm curious if there's questions that have come up or thoughts, Taylor, for you as you kind of hear it. Just talk through it.
Yeah, what's coming to my mind as I hear those steps is just how much intentional inner work it really takes to build emotionally healthy relationships.
Yeah.
We talked about that a little bit in the episode with Julie, and these steps are so helpful. So I'm curious, when you think about using the ladder of integrity in your own life, how have you personally seen it make a difference?
Oh my goodness. In so many ways. I've used it in getting clear about why I am having a hard time in different relationship dynamics. I've used it in um, like work relationships. And frankly, half the time I don't ever really share it with the person. I have shared it with the person before. It's felt appropriate. But oftentimes it's really for me to get clear about what's happening for me. And then I can establish like a course of action after that of how to kind of move through whatever is happening. And so for me, it's been like almost like a spiritual practice where I bring it to God in prayer, and journal a lot of it out and get curious about my reactions and my values. And then there's also like an opportunity to share it with someone too, in some sense of like, hey, like this is what I'm learning about myself. What do you see? And so it's been such a great tool to slow down, to check in, to get clear so that I can go back into relationships with a sense of clarity and desire to want to either repair or get honest about something, and build right depth in that relationship, for the betterment, right, of the dynamic.
Yeah, and over the last couple of years, I found that this kind of reflection of being in a relationship, noticing reactions and values, and then bringing that awareness back into relationship has really become a way of being. It's this beautiful ongoing process.
For sure.
So just to begin wrapping us up, for listeners who have heard all 12 steps and are maybe feeling overwhelmed or excited and ready to begin this process, where would you recommend they start when it comes to climbing the ladder of integrity?
Yeah, I think that the first step would just maybe start with the question right now, the issue on my mind is, right? Just starting with that, like, what can we notice a place in our system or something that's been kind of disruptive, um, just noticing that, just noticing what about it is challenging, and then I would really encourage people to just jump into whatever question on the ladder of integrity. You don't have to do all of them, but even just starting with like that number 7, or right within the thoughts and feelings of like, what am I feeling about this and what is my reaction telling me? Like those are really good questions, right? To get clear, and then to maybe take that value sheet and get curious about what's important to you. The hardest part of this, right, is for me to live in alignment with my values means it might be different than what other people in the dynamic are acting, right? And so it's not that we're coming at anyone, right, with like well, you have to do it this way because these are my values. I always say this to myself and my clients, they're your values. They're not someone else's. But if we can gently come to them with like, hey, like, here's how I would like to be approached, or here's what's helpful for me. It's an invitation in relationship, right? To be able to share our values with one another. And with respect and kindness, I think oftentimes relationships can flourish in that. Like, oh yeah, sure, I didn't know that was important to you. I can adjust, and so that's where I would encourage people to just start, just dip your toe in, see what feels like new, and stay there for a bit. And then from there, you can kind of build off of that to whether that be using the whole ladder or, using the ladder and bringing it to someone if we're having some hard difficulties of like what this situation, if it's a perpetual situation, this is oftentimes when I use it, of like, hey, I'm noticing a pattern in this dynamic and I want to be able to flush it out. And that's normally how I tend to use it for myself. And then if I have to bring it up to someone. But yeah, that would be my encouragement.
Yeah, so good. I love how this week's episode has really focused on the internal work. And next week, we're diving into healthy conflict resolution, which is really shifting into the external work of relationships.
That's right.
Anything else about the ladder of integrity that you think is important for our listeners to know?
Yeah, to what you just said, like, this is not a blaming tool. It's not a confrontational tool, although it can benefit communication in relationships. It helps us actually remove the blame from the dynamic so that we can get ready to talk clearly with other people. So it's kind of like a pregame, like do the ladder of integrity, and then we can clean fight, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, and just as a reminder, right, that like God has created us all uniquely. And so this is beautiful work to be able to give your system, to be able to say like, it's like, let's honor those values the way that God created us. And as we do that, I've experienced this, I'll speak for myself, that it feels a lot less urgent. It feels a lot less angry. It feels a lot, right? Like the tone and pressure shifts when I'm able to really own my values and say, yeah, this is how I'm feeling. And it's okay if you don't feel the same way. I'm going to be aligned with my values in this particular situation.
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Carly. I'm really looking forward to diving into conflict resolution skills with you next week.
Next week. Okay.
Wasn't that so good? Right now, I'm reading a book called Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer, and it parallels so beautifully with this idea of climbing the ladder of integrity. If you want to reflect more deeply on living in alignment with your values, I'd highly recommend it. So to close, I want to leave you with a Parker Palmer quote that I've been sitting with the last few days. He says this: "What a long time it can take to become the person one has always been. How often in the process we mask ourselves and faces that are not our own. How much dissolving and shaking of ego we must endure before we can discover our deep identity, the true self within every human being that is the seed of authentic vocation." I'll be sharing a PDF of the 12 steps for climbing the ladder of integrity in my Substack. So if you'd like to receive this resource, be sure to subscribe through the link in the show notes, and I'll see you next week. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.